Welcome. Tonight, we wander down a quiet Victorian street where the evening air is filled with the soft scent of blooming flowers, and golden lantern light glows gently against the cobblestones. At the corner of Blossom Street, there's a small flower shop, warm, peaceful, and softly lit, where petals rest quietly and time seems to slow. Inside, a gentle florist moves with calm care, arranging roses and lavender, each touch soft and unhurried, as if every flower holds a quiet story. So take a slow breath, let your body relax, and allow the world outside to fade away, because tonight, you are stepping into a calm evening in a flower shop, where every scent, every color, gently carries you into sleep. Part 1. Arrival on Blossom Street. There are certain evenings that seem to exist outside of ordinary time. Evenings when the light falls in a particular way, soft and golden and unhurried, and the air carries something that is difficult to name. Not quite perfume, not quite memory, something in between, like the feeling of a word you almost remember, or a song you have not heard since childhood, but still somehow know. This was one of those evenings. The street was called Blossom Street, though you would not have found it on any map you had seen before. It appeared the way certain things appear when you are very tired and very ready, gently, without announcement, like a door opening in a wall you had not noticed was there. The cobblestones were smooth and dark with the damp of an earlier rain, and it caught the light of the gas lamps in long, amber ribbons that stretched all the way down the lane and curved softly around the corner at its end. You had been walking for some time. You could not quite recall from where or toward what particular destination, but that did not trouble you. The evening was too quiet and too kind for trouble of any sort. Your coat was warm, your boots were soft against the stones, and with every step you took down Blossom Street, you felt something in your shoulders loosen, some long-held tightness releasing itself, the way a breath releases when you finally, truly stop trying. The gas lamps lined both sides of the lane at gentle intervals, and each one wore a soft halo in the evening mist. They did not flicker urgently. They simply glowed, patient and warm, like candles left burning in a window for someone expected home. Beneath each lamp, the cobblestones gleamed. The small window boxes on the terraced buildings above held the last of the season's trailing ivy, and it swayed almost imperceptibly in the breeze, a slow, sleepy swaying, like the motion of a rocking chair in a quiet room. Somewhere, distantly, you heard the sound of carriage wheels. The sound came from a street away, perhaps two, a low, rhythmic rolling over old stone, the gentle percussion of hooves in no particular hurry. It rose and then faded, as sounds do on still evenings, absorbed by the fog and the quiet and the general softness of the hour. Then there were footsteps, unhurried ones, belonging to someone you could not see, fading around a corner somewhere ahead. Then silence again, except for the very faint sigh of the breeze as it moved along the lane, carrying with it something extraordinary. Flowers. The scent reached you before anything else. It was not a sharp or insistent perfume, nothing so bold as that. It was layered and delicate and deeply, deeply comforting. There was rose in it, warm and sweet. There was something green and cool, like the inside of a stem just cut. There was lavender, soft as a murmur, and beneath everything, a faint, earthy sweetness that reminded you of damp soil and glass houses and slow summer afternoons. You breathed it in without thinking, and your pace slowed, and you looked up. That was when you saw the shop. It sat between two taller buildings like something placed there very carefully, given its own quiet space on the lane. It was small, narrower than the buildings on either side, with a front of pale stone and a wooden door painted a deep, faded green. The paint worn soft at the edges. Above the door, a carved wooden sign hung from a short iron bracket, and it swayed, just barely, almost not at all, in the same slow rhythm as the ivy in the window boxes above. You could read the words in the lamplight without quite trying, "The Blossom Street Flower Shop," and beneath it, in smaller, older letters, "Est, 1874. The window was everything. In the amber glow of the lamp outside and the warm, honeyed light from within, the window display seemed to breathe. There were roses, cream and blush and deep red, arranged in tall, dark glass vases. There were bundles of dried lavender tied with pale ribbon, and small pots of something white and delicate that nodded very gently in the draft from the door's edge. Trailing greenery spilled over a wooden shelf in long, lazy curtains. At the window's center, a small arrangement sat in a low clay bowl. White flowers with yellow hearts, so simple and so perfect that you stopped entirely, without meaning to, and simply looked at them. The light from inside was not electric. It was softer than that, and warmer. The amber light of oil lamps, perhaps, or of many small candles, though you could not see their source. It pooled on the wooden floor inside, and caught the glass of the vases, and turned everything within to gold. Watching it from the lamplit street, you felt the way you feel just before sleep. That particular loosening, that sense of the world becoming gentler, closer, quieter. You pushed open the green door. A small brass bell above the frame rang once, a single, sweet note, and then everything was still. The smell inside the shop was richer than the street, deeper and closer and extraordinarily peaceful. It surrounded you immediately, the way warm water surrounds you when you step into a bath. Rose and lavender and something almost sweet, like honey, and beneath it, all that green living scent of growing things, of petals and stems and the earth that sustains them. Bundles of dried flowers hung from the low wooden beams of the ceiling, soft cascades of lavender and chamomile and pale strawflower. Shelves along the walls held clay pots and glass jars and small paper parcels tied with twine. A wooden counter ran across the back of the room, its surface worn to a silvery smoothness by decades of hands. The shop was very quiet, pleasantly, profoundly quiet. And then, from somewhere in the back, from behind a curtain of pale linen that hung in the doorway beyond the counter, came the soft sound of movement, unhurried, deliberate. The sound of someone who had never found reason to move quickly through a room. She appeared a moment later, drawing the curtain aside with one hand, a small pair of cutting shears held loosely in the other. She was elderly and small, with white hair pinned softly at the back of her head. She wore a long apron over a dark dress, the apron's pockets full of some small tools of her trade, and her hands, which she wiped now on the apron's hem as she looked up, were the hands of someone who had worked gently and carefully with growing things for a very long time. There was soil beneath her fingernails. She did not seem troubled by this. Her eyes found you without surprise. They were very calm eyes, gray or blue. In the warm lamplight it was difficult to say, and they held in them the particular quality of someone who is genuinely, quietly glad to see you. Not with excitement, not with the bright energy of someone who has been waiting eagerly, but with the deeper, softer gladness of someone who has simply always expected you would come, eventually, and is pleased to have been right. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was quiet, not a whisper, but close. The kind of voice that belongs in rooms like this. In evenings like this. The kind of voice that does not need to be loud because everything it says is worth listening carefully for. "You found us," she said, and set the shears down on the counter with a faint, soft click. She said it not as a question and not quite as a statement, more as a gentle acknowledgement of something both of you already understood. You told her that you had been walking, and that the scent of the flowers had reached you from the street, and that you had found yourself stopping before you had quite decided to. She nodded slowly, as though this made complete and perfect sense. "That is generally how it happens," she said. "The flowers let people know when to come." She moved behind the counter with the same unhurried ease with which she had entered the room, straightening a jar here, adjusting the stem of a rose there. And then she looked up again and considered you for a moment with those calm, kind eyes. "You look," she said gently, "like someone who could do with sitting quietly for a little while." There was no judgment in it, no observation that required defending against. It was simply true. "There is a chair by the window," she said, nodding toward it. A small armchair, its cushion the color of moss, positioned beside the display so that you might look out at the lamplit lane. And I was about to make tea. She did not wait for an answer. She simply drew the curtain aside and disappeared back into the room beyond, and the soft sounds of her moving about in there. A kettle being lifted, the quiet tap of a cup set on a saucer, filled the shop with the most ordinary and the most comforting music in the world. You sat in the chair by the window. Outside, the lane was still. A gas lamp burned. The wooden sign swayed. And the flowers in the window beside you released their scent in slow, gentle waves into the warm and quiet air. You were, at last, exactly where you needed to be. Part 2. Inside the flower shop. The chair was softer than it looked. That was the first thing you noticed. Once you had settled into it, the way it received you, the cushion, giving just enough, the arm rests worn to the particular smoothness that only comes from years of use, and the slow, patient work of hands resting there in quieter moments. It was the kind of chair that had been sat in by many people over many years, and had learned, somewhere along the way, how to hold a person gently. You let your coat fall open. You let your hands rest. From behind the pale linen curtain came the small domestic music of the shopkeeper moving about her back room, the low murmur of water beginning to warm, the soft knock of a wooden drawer being opened and closed, the rustle of something dried and papery being handled with care. These sounds reached you not as intrusions, but as reassurances, evidence that the world was continuing in its gentle way, that someone nearby was busy with quiet and useful things, and that nothing was required of you for the moment but to be still. So you were still, and in the stillness, the shop came to you. It was the kind of room that revealed itself slowly. You had taken it in all at once when you first entered, the warmth, the scent, the golden light. But now, settled and unhurried, you began to see its particulars. The way the light moved, for instance. There were 2 oil lamps mounted on the walls, their flames behind amber glass that softened everything they touched. And on the counter at the back, a pair of candles burned in low iron holders, their flames barely trembling in the undisturbed air. A third light source hung from the central beam, a small lantern of dark metal and clouded glass, and the light it threw was the softest of all, diffuse and warm, more like a glow than a light, like the last light of a winter afternoon gathered and kept. Everything the light fell on, it made beautiful. The wooden tables were the heart of the room. There were 3 of them, 2 long ones running parallel down the shop's length, and a smaller round one near the door, and they were covered entirely, generously, abundantly with flowers. Not in the arranged, formal way of a display, though there was beauty in the arrangement, but in the way of a room where working with flowers is the daily business of life, where buckets are filled and bundles are sorted and stems are cut and gathered and tied, and where the excess of all that quiet industry creates something that is less like a shop and more like a garden that has come inside for the evening. In tall, dark glass vases along the left table, roses stood in loose clusters, cream roses with the faintest blush at their centers, deep red ones, almost burgundy, their outer petals just beginning to curve away, pale pink ones so delicate in color that they seemed less like pink and more like white that had had a gentle thought. Their stems disappeared into dark water, and the water caught the candlelight and held it, small, still flames reflected in the bottoms of each vase, as though the roses were blooming above a very calm, very miniature sky. Beside the roses, lavender, bundles of it tied with plain cotton twine and stacked in a wide-mouthed crock of pale clay. The bundles were dry, and they rustled very faintly, the softest possible sound, like the turning of a page in a quiet library when the small draft from some unseen gap found them. Their scent was distinct within the room's larger perfume, cool and clean and medicinal in the best sense, the scent of something that has always known how to calm. The second table held the wildflowers. These were looser, more various, more difficult to name. There were small white flowers on long stems that nodded when anything moved near them. There were yellow ones the size of buttons, gathered in clusters. There was something purple and feathery that you had no name for, and something else, a trailing, small-leafed vine that spilled from its container and lay across the table's edge in a long, curling tendril, as though it were simply resting there and might, if the evening continued quietly enough, decide to stay. Between the arrangements, the tools of the trade lay where they had been set down. A pair of long scissors, their blades dark with use, a spool of ribbon, pale green, almost silver, half unwound, a small notebook, its cover soft with handling, lying open to a page of handwritten names and numbers too small and too private to read from where you sat. A scattering of fallen petals on the table's surface, rose pink and cream, and the deep red purple of dried lavender, lying where they had fallen without anyone thinking to move them. They were beautiful there, like something painted. The linen curtain shifted, and the shopkeeper came through. She carried a tray with the careful, practiced ease of someone who has carried trays for a long time and no longer needs to think about it. On the tray, a small earthenware pot, rounded and dark, from which a thin thread of steam rose and curled in the warm air. 2 cups, not matching, but similarly worn, similarly comfortable to look at, and a small dish holding a folded cloth and a few dried flowers that she had evidently added as a last thought. She set the tray on the round table near the door with a faint, settled sound and looked at you. "Chamomile," she said, with a little linden blossom. "And I added some dried rose petal, which does nothing particular but smells very pleasant." She poured without asking whether you wanted any. The liquid was pale gold, the color, almost exactly, of the lamplight in the room, and its steam carried the scent of the chamomile. Gentle, slightly sweet, with the faint honeyed quality of the linden behind it. She set a cup before you on the arm of the chair, on a small wooden coaster that seemed to have lived on that armrest for years, worn into a slight hollow in the wood. Then she settled herself into the chair on the other side of the round table, a chair of similar vintage to yours, its back slightly higher, its cushion a faded rose. And she poured her own cup and wrapped both hands around it and sat for a moment without speaking. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who have no particular need to fill the air between them. After a while, she said, "You have come a long way this evening." You agreed that you had, though the distance was difficult to measure. She nodded, as though this made sense. "The evenings that bring people to Blossom Street are usually the longer kind," she said. "The kind where you have been carrying something heavy for some time and have only just begun to notice the weight of it." You looked into your cup. The tea was very slightly too warm to drink comfortably, and you held it without drinking and let its warmth move through the clay and into your palms. "I find," she continued without urgency, "that flowers help, not because they solve anything, but because they are very honest about what they are, and they ask nothing of you in return for being beautiful. There is a restfulness in that." She reached out and adjusted, almost absently, a stem that had leaned slightly out of a nearby vase, a cream rose, its head full and just beginning to open, and set it back among its companions with a touch so gentle it barely moved the water. "I have been in this shop for 41 years, she said. "My mother ran it before me and her uncle before her. The names change. The flowers do not change very much." A pause. "Neither does the reason people find their way here." You asked her what reason that was. She considered it seriously, as she seemed to consider most things. "Rest," she said finally. "Real rest. The kind you cannot arrange or schedule. The kind that simply arrives when you are somewhere quiet enough and safe enough to let it." The candle on the counter nearest to you had burned lower than its companion, and its flame was very small now, a gentle, barely there thing that produced more warmth than light, and cast long, slow shadows across the petal-scattered table. Somewhere outside on the lane, far away, the sound of carriage wheels rose and faded again. The lavender bundles rustled in their crock. From somewhere in the depths of the shop, beyond the curtain, came the slow drip of water, a tap left not quite closed, marking time in its small, unhurried way. You drank your tea. It was warm and very slightly sweet, and tasted of the same air that surrounded you, that deep, layered, flower-filled air that had been accumulating in this room for more than a century, pressed gently into the wood of the tables and the worn cushions of the chairs and the walls themselves, so that even in winter, even at midnight, the shop would smell of growing things. The shopkeeper did not speak again for a little while. She held her cup, the light held still. The flowers leaned toward each other in their vases, in the particular way that flowers do, not touching, but close. You felt your eyes grow heavy. Not urgently, not with the abrupt heaviness of exhaustion, with the slow, certain heaviness of someone who has finally, completely arrived somewhere safe, and whose body, recognizing this at last, is beginning very gently to let go. The candle burned. The lavender rustled. The tea grew cool in your hands.
You are not.
The station breathed differently after midnight. It was Emiliano who suggested the walk, not the young porter who scurried about with luggage carts and apologies, but the older one, the one with the silver-threaded mustache and the unhurried way of moving, as though he had long since made peace with time. He had found the traveler sitting alone on a bench near platform 3, coat folded across the lap, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. A quiet person recognizes another quiet person. Without ceremony, Emiliano had said only, "Come, the tracks are worth seeing at this hour." And somehow, without question, the traveler had risen and followed. They passed through a low iron gate at the far end of the platform, the hinges sighing like something half asleep, and stepped out into the open space behind the station where the world fell away into a long corridor of shadow and silver. The tracks ran ahead of them in twin lines, curving gently out of sight toward the eastern hills. At this hour they had stopped being instruments of industry and become something else entirely, something lunar, almost devotional. The rails caught the starlight along their polished upper edges and held it, so that two unbroken rivers of soft luminescence stretched into the dark, parallel and patient, as though the sky had simply decided to lie down and rest a while upon the earth. The traveler slowed without meaning to, arrested by it. "I never get used to it," Emiliano said, noticing. 22 years, and I still stop here most nights to look." The gravel underfoot gave a small, muffled crunch with each step, a sound like the settling of a house, like the turning of pages in an empty library. It was cool out, but gently so, the kind of cool that does not demand anything of you, that simply rests against the skin the way a grandmother's hand rests against a forehead. The traveler pulled the coat on properly and felt, with some surprise, deeply comfortable. Far down the yard, 3 or 4 trains stood in their sidings, dark and enormous. They were not sleeping exactly. Machines do not sleep, but they had assumed something like the posture of sleep, still, massed, their breath held. Occasionally, a soft metallic sound drifted up from their direction, a tick or a groan of cooling metal, and the night absorbed it easily, the way still water absorbs a stone. The traveler thought about all the miles those trains had traveled that day, all the windows through which the countryside had poured like a film, unreeling, all the faces momentarily illuminated in their glass reflections. And now this perfect cessation. The station building itself glowed amber behind them. A single lamp on platform 1 swept its yellow circle back and forth in a slow arc, moved by nothing visible, or perhaps by the gentlest of breezes. It caught the edge of a baggage cart, the corner of a sign, the back of a bench, and released each in turn, and the traveler watched it for a long time, hypnotized, the way one watches the beam of a lighthouse from a hillside, not for any practical reason, but because something in the rhythmic sweep answers something rhythmic inside the chest. "Do you think about them?" the traveler asked eventually. "The people who pass through." Emiliano considered the question without hurry. They had stopped walking by some mutual unspoken agreement and were standing side by side between the rails, which was perhaps not strictly permitted, but felt, at this hour, entirely reasonable. every day," he said. "And at night, too, sometimes. But not in a sad way. More like, you know how a river thinks about its water? It doesn't mourn the water that has passed. It is simply made of passing." The traveler turned this over. "I used to want to hold on to things," the traveler said. "Moments, places. I thought if I held tightly enough, they wouldn't go. And now?" A pause. Somewhere in the dark, a night bird called once and fell silent. Now I think the holding was the problem. I was so busy clutching the moment that I couldn't feel it. Emiliano made a small sound of agreement, warm and unperforming. He reached into his breast pocket and produced 2 wrapped sweets, the kind sold at the station kiosk, hard candies in crinkled paper, and offered one without comment. The traveler accepted it. They unwrapped them in companionable quiet, the paper crinkling loudly and absurdly in the stillness, and both of them smiled at the sound. They walked on. The gravel gave way briefly to packed earth, then back to gravel again, each texture speaking its own particular word beneath the feet. The stars above were extraordinary, this far from the main platforms. Away from even the station's modest light, they arrived in multitudes, crowded and careless, spilled like sugar across a dark cloth. The traveler tipped the head back and felt the familiar ancient sensation. Smallness without sadness, the loosening of something knotted behind the sternum. "I used to think," Emiliano said, "that the purpose of travel was the destination. That all this, the waiting, the passing through, was simply the price you paid. And now?" He gestured unhurriedly at the space around them, at the rails holding their stolen starlight, at the distant amber glow of the station, at the gravel, the cool air, the resting trains, the lamplight making its patient revolutions. "Now I think this is the destination," he said. "All of it, every between place, every in-between hour." The traveler felt something shift, quietly and without drama, the way a door that has been stuck for a long season finally swings open on a warm day, not with any great force, just with ease, and a sense of having always been about to. Gratitude arrived in the way it sometimes does at night, not as a thought, but as a sensation, warm and spreading, beginning somewhere below the ribs and moving upward. Gratitude for this walk, unplanned and unscheduled, for the porter who had simply said come and meant it, for the rails and their light-keeping, for the night bird, for the candy wrapper's crinkle, for the specific cool of this specific air, for being here at all, in this between place, in this between hour. They turned back eventually, neither of them announcing the decision. The station drew them gently, its amber windows like the windows of a house one has lived in for a long time and loves without always noticing. The lamp was still sweeping its slow arc across Platform 1. A night train was being readied somewhere in the distance. The traveler could hear the first stirrings, the low, purposeful sounds of something large, remembering its function. At the gate, Emiliano held it open, and the hinges sighed again. "Thank you," the traveler said. It was not enough, and was exactly enough. The old porter smiled, not the professional smile he deployed for passengers with questions and complaints, but a smaller, quieter one, worn only in certain hours. "Sleep well," he said. "The morning trains are kind ones." The traveler walked back through the station, past the dozing ticket windows, the dark kiosk, the benches where strangers had sat and would sit again, and found the small room beyond Platform 4 that had been arranged for the night. The sheets were cool and plain. The window looked out on the yard, and there, just visible from the pillow, the two rails still ran their quiet course into the dark, still holding what starlight they had been given, steady and unhurried, going nowhere and everywhere at once. The traveler closed both eyes, and for perhaps the first time in a very long journey, felt no need to be anywhere else. Outside, the lamp went on sweeping. The gravel settled. The trains breathed their slow, metallic breath, and the night held everything gently, the way it always does, like cupped hands full of water, careful not to spill. It happened just before the first light, that particular shade of dark that is not quite night anymore, when the sky turns from black to a deep, exhausted blue, and the stars don't vanish so much as recede, politely, as though stepping back to allow someone else through. The traveler had not slept so much as drifted, the way you drift in shallow water, aware of the surface but untroubled by it, and had woken, if waking was the right word, to find the window full of that blue and the yard outside very still, and a feeling of unusual clarity sitting quietly in the chest like a warm stone. Emiliano was waiting in the corridor, not waiting in any urgent sense. He was simply there, the way certain things are simply there in the early morning. A cup already filled, a door already open, as though they had been arranged by some gentle and attentive intelligence that asks nothing in return. He had his uniform coat on, but the brass buttons were not all fastened, and his cap was tucked under his arm rather than worn, which gave him the look of a man between roles, belonging more to the morning than to the station. In his other hand he held something small. He did not draw attention to it. "You are leaving on the 7:15?" he said. It was not a question. "I am." He nodded, and they stood for a moment in the particular companionship that had grown between them, not long enough to have history, but deep enough, somehow, to have trust. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere below, the station was beginning its first tentative stirrings. A trolley wheel, a distant door, the low exchange of voices from the platform staff arriving for the early shift. But up here, not yet. Up here, there was still a margin of stillness, and they were standing in it together. The traveler took it. It was lighter than expected, lighter almost than it had any right to be, as though it were more idea than object, and warm. Not the warmth of a hand that has recently held it, but its own warmth, interior and constant, like a coal that has been banked for a long night and still holds the memory of its fire. The luminescence moved again, and the traveler felt something answer it, a settling, a quieting, the sensation of a compass needle finding north. "I don't know what I'm meant to do with it," the traveler said. "Nothing," said Emiliano. "You're not meant to do anything with it. It isn't a tool." He seemed to consider for a moment how to say the next thing. When you're on the train and you can't remember what you're traveling toward, when you arrive somewhere new and the newness feels like too much, when the night is very long and you've lost the thread. He tilted his head gently. "Hold it, that's all. Just hold it and let it remind you." "Remind me of what?" He smiled. "The small private one, the one that wasn't for passengers. That you already know the way." The traveler closed the fingers around the vial and stood with it for a moment, out the window, at the end of the corridor. The sky had shifted to a deep rose along the horizon's edge, and the rails below had caught it and were holding it, those faithful keepers of light, already preparing for the day's first reflections. A pigeon landed on the platform railing, looked around with the brisk authority of a bird that has places to be, and flew off again. Somewhere in the station's belly, The first proper sounds of morning were gathering themselves. "You've given things like this before," the traveler said. It was not entirely a guess. Emiliano looked briefly surprised, then thoughtful, once or twice, when someone seemed to need it more than I did. A pause, and each time I thought I'd miss it, but I never did. It always seemed to refill somehow. The station keeps making more. There was a rightness to this that the traveler didn't need to examine. Some things explain themselves not to the mind, but to somewhere quieter. "Can I ask you something?" the traveler said. "Of course. What is it you love about this? The night work, the empty platforms, all the arriving and leaving. Most people would find it lonely." Emiliano looked down the corridor toward the window and its rising light, and was quiet for long enough that the traveler wondered if the question had been too much. But then he said, "I used to travel when I was young. I was always looking for the place where I would finally feel settled. I went a long way looking for it." A beat. "Then one night I was working late, my first year here, and the last train pulled out, and the platform went quiet, and I just stopped, and I thought, oh, it's here. It was here the whole time." The traveler felt the small warm weight of the vial in the palm. It was here the whole time. They walked down together to platform 4, and the station was filling now with morning's gentle industry. A woman arranging newspapers at the kiosk, 2 young porters comparing manifests, the ticket windows flickering to life one by one like candles lit down a long table. The 7:15 stood at its platform, patient and enormous, exhaling soft white breath into the cool air. A few early passengers were already boarding, moving through the yellow doorlight with their bags and their sleepy, purposeful faces, each of them carrying whatever it was they were carrying, toward whatever it was they were going toward. At the door to the carriage, the traveler turned. There were things to say. The traveler could feel them, a whole gathering of them. Words of gratitude and recognition, and the particular love one feels for people who give gifts without needing acknowledgement for the giving. But Emiliano made a small gesture, unhurried, that somehow absorbed all of it and returned it simply as warmth. "Safe travels," he said. "All of them." The traveler stepped up into the carriage and found a window seat, and the train began its slow departure. The platform sliding past, the station drawing back, the yards opening up into open country with their quiet geometry of rails and signals, and the blue morning light lying flat and clean across it all. Emiliano was already gone. Back to the station, back to the corridor and the platforms, and the long, reliable work of being present for whoever arrived next. The traveler held the vial up to the window. In the morning light, it glowed differently, warmer, less silver now, more gold, the luminescence steady and unhurried. It seemed almost to pulse. Or perhaps that was simply the traveler's own pulse, felt through the fingers, the body's constant and ordinary miracle. The countryside moved past. The rails sang their quiet traveling song. And in the palm of one hand, small as a secret and weightless as understanding, the light went on, doing what it had always done, shining without effort. From the inside out, the dawn came in like something that had been waiting outside all night, patient and unhurried, asking nothing. First, there was only the suggestion of it, a loosening of the dark along the eastern edge of things, a softening, the way ice doesn't so much melt as simply stop being ice. Then, a color that had no name, or had too many. Not quite rose, not quite the gray of a dove's wing, but something that moved between all three, as though unable to choose and content not to. The mist that had settled overnight in the low places along the tracks against the station's stone foundations, pooling in the doorways of the goods sheds, caught this unnameable color and held it, and the whole world for a few minutes was made of nothing but that soft, suffused light and the stillness underneath it. The traveler stood on platform 4 with a bag at the feet and watched it happen. The Victorian station rose above in its old authority, the iron canopy with its fretwork edges, still lovely after so many decades of weather and steam. The red brick face of the main building, its high windows beginning to catch the first genuine light and return it in warm amber panels, the clock above the entrance, its hands moving with the same patient indifference with which they had moved for over 100 years, marking a kind of time that had less to do with minutes and more to do with the accumulated weight of all the arrivals and departures that had passed beneath it. Pigeons walked the roofline. A sparrow landed on the back of the nearest bench, assessed the traveler with one bright eye, and flew off satisfied. There was wood smoke somewhere, and something else, the particular morning smell of a working station, metal and stone, and old timber, and the ghost of tea, and the clean cold air pushing through it all like a thread through cloth. The traveler breathed it in and thought, I will remember this. Not the trying to remember kind, but the kind that just happens, that settles somewhere wordless and stays. Emiliano came along the platform at 6:10, which was when he always came, had always come, would presumably go on coming long after this particular morning was only one more morning. In a long chain of them, he walked with his unhurried walk, coat fastened now, cap on, the professional version of himself restored. And yet the warmth of the previous night was still visible, the way lamplight is still visible in a room after the lamp has been turned down. Not bright, but present. He carried 2 cups of tea in the station's thick white mugs, and he offered one without preamble. And the traveler took it, and they stood together watching the dawn advance across the yard. The tea was too hot to drink properly, so they held it instead, and the warmth came up through the ceramic and into the palms, and this was enough. Will you go far? Emiliano asked after a while. Some distance, the traveler said. I'm not certain where I'll stop. You'll know when you get there. You said that before. The mist along the tracks was beginning to stir now, moved by the small breathing warmth of the arriving morning. It lifted in soft columns, drifted, broke apart into wisps that caught the light and were briefly golden before dissolving into nothing. The tracks emerged from it in stages. First the rails' polished crowns, then the wooden sleepers, then the whole long grammar of the line running away into the middle distance, where it curved gently and disappeared into a stand of trees, still dark against the brightening sky. Beyond those trees, the world, whatever the world was this morning, whatever it was holding, the traveler touched the breast pocket where the vial was kept. It was there, warm and constant. I don't know how to thank you, the traveler said, for any of it. The walk last night, the conversation, a small gesture toward the pocket. Emiliano turned his cup in his hands. You don't need to. The station thanks people for passing through. That's what it's for. He looked along the platform in both directions, at the length of the thing, the stone and iron of it, the old reliable bones of it. I'm just part of the station. You're the best part of it. He received this quietly, neither dismissing it nor being overwhelmed by it. He had the gift, the traveler thought, of accepting kindness without flinching, of letting gratitude land without deflecting it away. It was a rare thing, and perhaps only possible in people who had long since stopped needing praise to know their worth. The 7:15 was announced. The sound moved through the station with the low authority of a thing that had been announced 10,000 mornings before, and would be announced 10,000 mornings after, neither triumphant nor sorrowful, simply factual. The world organizing itself in its usual way. The traveler picked up the bag. They stood facing each other in the manner of people who have found, briefly, a profound and uncomplicated understanding, and who know it is time to release it back into the larger world from which it came. There are goodbyes that take a long time, because the words haven't been found yet. This was not one of those. The words were not needed. What existed between them was complete without them. Emiliano held out his hand. The traveler took it, not a brisk professional shake, but the kind of handshake that lasts a moment longer than social convention requires. The kind where both people are aware of the weight and warmth of another hand and grateful for it. "Safe travels," he said. "All of them, all of them," the traveler echoed. And then the traveler was walking along the platform, through the low gate at the far end, and out onto the misty path that ran beside the tracks as they left the station's domain and moved out into open country. This path was narrow and slightly overgrown at its edges, soft with moss between the sleepers, the ground giving gently underfoot the way good ground does after rain. The mist was thicker here, away from the station's warmth, and it moved around the traveler's feet like something affectionate, like the hems of a very quiet tide. The traveler walked. Behind, the station was already beginning to change, to soften, to become more idea than building, the way things do when you move away from them in morning mist. The clock tower was still visible, its face a pale circle above the dissolving roofline. The iron canopy caught the new light and gave back a last, long gleam. The red brick held its warmth for a moment, a final blush, and then the mist folded around it gently, and it was gone. Not abruptly, not with any drama, but the way a dream goes when you try to hold it. Gradually and completely. And with the feeling that it has not disappeared so much as moved somewhere just beyond the edge of seeing. The traveler did not look back more than once, not out of indifference, out of something better than that, out of the knowledge that it was all still there and would be there, and that what had happened inside those walls and on those platforms and beside those rails was not the kind of thing that required looking back to confirm its reality. It had happened. It was carried now, in the warmth of two hands recently held, in the settled feeling behind the ribs, in the small luminous weight in the breast pocket that pulsed its gentle pulse, steady as a second heartbeat, quiet as a lamp in a window seen from a long way off on a cold night. The path curved. The trees closed in on either side, bare-limbed and patient, their upper branches beginning to catch the growing light and hold it in fine nets. Somewhere in them, birds were beginning, not in chorus yet, just the first tentative voices, each one separate and careful, feeling out the morning's acoustics, making sure the day was ready to receive them. The traveler walked on, and the world breathed, and the mist went on lifting. This is where we leave them. Not at a destination, because there is no final destination. Not really. Only the next arrival and the one after that, each one carrying its own small revelations, its own lamplit platforms and unhurried porters and nights when the rails hold the stars and everything becomes, briefly, luminous. We leave them here on the quiet path in the soft in-between of dawn, that tender hour when the dark has fully released its hold and the day has not yet begun to press. That hour when the world is at its most permissive, when the mind loosens its grip on all it has been carrying and the body remembers what it is to be simply warm and breathing and held by nothing more demanding than the morning air. Perhaps you are in that hour now. Perhaps the day is already done and the journey has been long, and you are somewhere soft and still, a room you know, a pillow you trust, the familiar dark behind your closed eyes. Let the station go. Let the porter stand at his platform, calm and kind, one hand raised. Let the rails run their silver roads into the dark and the distance. Let the vial rest in the pocket, warm and constant, doing what it was always doing, shining from the inside out, quiet and sufficient, asking nothing. You already know the way. You have always known the way. Rest now. The trains are sleeping, the night is gentle, and the dawn is coming. Absolutely everything is well. Most people in Victorian London slept peacefully through the night, never once wondering who kept the great clock tower of Whitechapel alive. But every night, long after the city had fallen silent and the fog had swallowed the streets, an old caretaker climbed the narrow spiral stairs of that tower, lantern in hand. Above the sleeping rooftops, among the slow-turning gears and the steady heartbeat of the clock, he guarded a rhythm that London had trusted for generations. And tonight, something about the tower feels just a little different. So dim the lights, settle comfortably, and listen closely, because the quiet story of the clock tower caretaker of Whitechapel is about to begin.
You're weak, not physically, mentally. Every time you say, "I'll start tomorrow," every time you choose comfort over growth, every time you negotiate with your own standards, you prove it. You don't lack potential, you lack discipline. And until that changes, your life won't. If that hit you, good, because today, you're going to confront the version of yourself that keeps you small. There are two versions of you. One wants comfort, one wants power, one wants approval, one wants respect, one wants to feel good, one wants to become better. They both live inside you, and every single day, one of them wins. The comfortable version wakes up and says, "You slept late. It's fine. You deserve rest. Don't be so hard on yourself. You can start Monday." He sounds kind, but he's killing you slowly. The disciplined version, he doesn't speak much. He doesn't argue. He doesn't negotiate. The alarm rings. He moves. No speech, no drama, no emotional speech about destiny. Just movement. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The version you feed survives. The other starves. Every excuse is a vote. Every repetition is reinforcement. Identity is built through evidence. If you consistently delay, you become someone who delays. If you consistently act, you become someone who executes. There is no neutral state. You are either sharpening your edge or softening it. The mirror doesn't lie. The version you see today is the result of your repeated decisions, not your intentions, not your dreams, your patterns. Most people misunderstand power. They think it's loud, dominant, aggressive, but real power is controlled. If your emotions control your schedule, your life can be predicted. And if you can be predicted, you can be controlled. Think about it. You work when inspired, you quit when bored. You argue when triggered. You avoid when uncomfortable. That makes you easy to manipulate. Emotionally reactive people are programmable. The world pushes. They move. The world provokes. They explode. The world tempts. They fold. But disciplined people are different. They respond. They don't react. They feel everything. But they don't obey everything. Imagine this. You're criticized publicly. Version 1. Defensive. Emotional. Explaining. Overtalking. Version 2. Still. Listening. Observing. Maybe responding. Maybe not. Which one holds power? Silence is not weakness. It's strategy. Most people announce everything. New goals, new routines, new chapters. Why? Because attention feels like progress. Dopamine mimics achievement, but it isn't achievement. Talking about becoming disciplined is not discipline. Posting about grind is not grind. Real discipline grows in silence. When you stop explaining yourself, you reclaim energy. When you stop broadcasting plans, you protect momentum. The most focused person in the room is usually the quietest. Not because they lack ideas, because they're building. And builders don't perform. They construct. Another layer, emotional authority. You say, I don't feel like it. Since when did your feelings become your leader? You are supposed to lead your mind, not the other way around. Your emotions are advisors. Some are wise. Some are dramatic. None of them make the final decision. When the alarm rings, move. When resistance appears, act anyway. That repetition builds something rare, stability. And stable people are hard to shake. When people realize you cannot be baited, cannot be rushed, cannot be emotionally steered, they stop trying. That is power. Not loud power, quiet power. Let's remove theory. Here's how discipline is built. 1. The 3-second rule. It's 4:00 a.m. Alarm rings. Your brain begins negotiation immediately. 5 more minutes. You slept late. Tomorrow will be better. That negotiation window is your battlefield. 3, 2, 1. Move. No thinking. Stand up. The longer you stay still, the weaker you become. Movement builds authority. Hesitation builds doubt. You don't build discipline in the gym. You build it in the first 3 seconds after discomfort. 2 monk mode intervals. You don't need to disappear forever, but you need controlled isolation. Turn the phone face down. Notifications off. 1 task. No switching. No dopamine hopping. The first 10 minutes will feel painful. Your brain is addicted to stimulation. That discomfort. Withdrawal. Push through it. After 20 minutes, focus stabilizes. After 40 minutes, you enter flow. Most people never reach that state because they quit at minute 7. Productive isolation builds internal anchoring. Anchored people don't drift. 3. Cut weak habits without drama. Don't announce detox. Don't declare transformation. Just remove it. Delete the app. Stop the late-night scrolling. Replace impulse with structure. Weak habits survive in secrecy. Kill them with consistency. 4. No public announcements. If you must tell the world you're changing, you're not changing yet. Let results shock people. Not captions. Not speeches. Silence is protection. Execution is proof. There is a version of you that must die, not violently, but deliberately. The one who procrastinated, The one who explained instead of executed. The one who waited for perfect timing. The one who said, "I'm just not ready yet." Imagine his funeral. The room is quiet. No one cries, because he never committed fully to anything. He admired discipline. He saved motivational videos. He never embodied them. Today you bury him. You don't destroy your personality. You destroy your weakness. You don't become colder. You become clearer. Clear about your standards. Clear about your direction. Clear about what you tolerate. From this moment, no more later. No more almost. No more emotional bargaining. Only action. Only standards. Only follow-through. The old identity fades the moment you stop feeding it. And when that identity dies, a sharper one emerges. Not louder. Sharper. Not aggressive. Grounded. Real power is quiet. It doesn't chase attention. It doesn't demand validation. It doesn't explain itself. It simply exists. When you control your impulses, you control your direction. When you control your direction, you control your outcomes. And when you no longer need approval, you become untouchable. Not because you dominate others, because nothing dominates you. You walk slower. You speak less. You observe more. Your presence changes. People sense it. Not because you demand attention, because you no longer seek it. That is cold freedom. Calm. Measured. Unshakable. Most people will feel inspired right now. Most people will comment something emotional. Most people will forget this tomorrow. Only a small percentage will apply it. Only a small percentage will wake up and move without negotiation. Only a small percentage will build silent consistency. If you are part of that 1%, don't comment for motivation. Comment as commitment. Type, "I choose discipline." Not for me, for you. Because the moment you consciously choose it, the old version loses power, and the disciplined version begins to take control. This isn't content. It's a decision point. Welcome to the version of you you haven't met yet. And once you meet him, you won't go back. You think transparency is a virtue? You are wrong. It is a target on your back. Every time you speak, you lose power. Stop begging for validation. It is time to kill the weak version of yourself. Right now. You've been walking through life pretending you're fine. Pretending the silence inside you is peace, when it is actually pressure. Pretending your distractions are hobbies, when they are actually escape routes. People see your smile, but they don't see the nights you sit alone, staring at the wall. They don't see the conversations you replay in your head, over and over. They don't see the moments where you question your identity, your purpose, your strength. Listen to me closely. Transparency is not a virtue. In the modern world, transparency is painting a target on your back. Machiavelli warned us centuries ago. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. But you think opening your chest makes you trustworthy. You are wrong. When you bleed in the water, the sharks do not feel mercy. They feel hunger. Stop pretending this burden is normal. You are carrying a dead version of yourself. Drop it. This world reads your posture before it hears your words. It reads your silence before your sentences. It reads your hesitation before your decisions. You thought you were invisible. No. Your energy has been screaming louder than your voice ever did. People notice when you avoid eye contact. They smell it when you are unsure. The world is not cruel. It is observant. It rewards strength. It respects clarity. It follows decisiveness. But when you move without intention, you look lost. And when you look lost, people guide you where they want you to go. Every time you step out your door, you enter an arena. Status is negotiated. Power is assessed. If you walk into a room apologizing for your existence, you are signaling that you are a victim. Power is not dominance. Power is direction. A lion does not roar before it stalks. It roars after the kill. Move in silence. Let your presence be the loudest thing in the room. You've been wearing a mask for years, not to deceive people, but to survive them. You learned early that vulnerability wasn't always welcomed, that honesty wasn't always safe. So you built walls, not to hide, but to shield. The problem isn't the mask. The problem is you outgrew it. You became a deeper person than the surface-level version you present. Your mask is now too small, too tight. It is suffocating you. Here is the strategic truth. The old mask protected you, but the new one must empower you. Be yourself is advice for fools. Be who you must be. Rebuild the mask, not to hide your weakness, but to protect your strength. Do not leak your plans. Do not leak your emotions. Let them speculate about you. Their imagination will paint a picture far more terrifying than reality. You finally choose who gets access to the real you and who never will. This is not isolation. This is sovereignty. There's a fire inside you that you've been trying to control, not because it's dangerous, but because you were taught to dim your light so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. You lowered your voice. You softened your ambition. You shrank your presence. But here's the truth. Your fire was never the problem. Your environment was. People weren't intimidated by your flaws. They were intimidated by your potential. Mediocrity hates excellence because it reminds them of what they are not. Fire doesn't die. It waits, it smolders, and now it's time to let it burn again. Not explosively, but with controlled, cold power. You are not here to be harmless. You are here to be dangerous and disciplined. If they are uncomfortable with your heat, let them burn.
Welcome to night. We drift softly along the quiet Victorian docks, where a gentle fog hugs the wooden piers and the water whispers softly against the moored ships. A small tea shop glows warmly at the edge of the harbor, its lanterns spilling golden light onto the cobblestones. The air smells faintly of spices, herbs, and calming teas, inviting you to step inside. Behind the counter, an elderly tea merchant moves slowly, arranging tins and pouring steaming cups, each action carrying a sense of patience, care, and quiet magic. So settle in, let your shoulders relax, and let the soft rhythm of the harbor and the warm glow of the tea shop guide you into the Tea Merchant of Victorian Dockside, a gentle place where sleep comes easily. Part 1. Arrival at the dockside. The city had long since folded itself inward for the evening. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, the last amber light of day was dissolving into a quiet, seamless gray, and the great harbor of the dockside lay still, very still, beneath a sky that seemed to breathe. You had been walking for some time. Your coat was damp at the shoulders. Your boots found the cobblestones easily now, as though your feet had memorized the route without being asked. Ahead of you, the wooden piers stretched out over the water, like sleeping arms extended in rest. The dock was old, older than most of the buildings that surrounded it, and its timber planks had darkened over many decades to the color of strong tea. They exhaled a scent of brine and old oak and something faintly mineral something of the deep water that lay just a few feet below. You walked slowly along the edge of the quay, listening. The ships were in, 3 of them, perhaps 4. It was difficult to be certain. In the thickening dusk, their hulls sat low and contented in the water. Great wooden vessels that had been carried across far oceans and had now arrived at last at a place of rest. Their masts stood quiet against the sky. Their ropes, thick as a man's fist and darkened with salt, creaked in a slow, unhurried rhythm, a sound not unlike the rocking of a cradle or the settling of an old house at night. The mist had come in off the water. It moved the way mist always moves in harbor towns, not in a rush, not with any particular intent, but simply arriving the way sleep arrives, in layers and drifts. It pooled around the base of the dock lanterns and rose in slow coils above the surface of the dark water. It softened the far edge of the quay. It made the far ships look like suggestions of ships, outlines remembered rather than seen, somewhere deep in the channel, somewhere beyond the reach of the lantern light, beyond the mist. A foghorn sounded. It was low, unhurried, a single note held long and then released, rolling across the water until it dissolved entirely into the quiet. You paused. You listened to it fade, and then it sounded again, just as low, just as unhurried, and again you waited, and again it faded. It was the sound of great distances made gentle, the sound of a world that was very large and very calm and very far away. You had no particular reason to linger, and yet you lingered. The cold did not trouble you tonight. The damp did not trouble you. Something in the quality of the light, amber and soft from the dock lamps above, reflected in long wobbling lines across the dark harbor water below, held you in place, easy and unhurried, as though time here moved at a different pace than the city behind you. It was the sign you noticed first. Small, wooden, hung from a bracket above a low door set between a chandler's store and a closed counting house. The paint was not new. It had weathered to a warm, honest brown, but the letters were still clear, picked out in a faded gold that caught what little light remained. Dockside, Tea Merchant. Below the letters, someone had painted, long ago, a small illustration, a teapot, steam rising from its spout in a single gentle curl. The window was narrow, its glass old and slightly wavy, the kind that bends the light through itself in a pleasant, imprecise way. Through it came a warmth, a golden warmth, the warmth of a lamp turned low, of a fire well established in a good grate, and it spilled out across the wet cobblestones in a small, welcoming pool. You stood in that pool of light for a moment without moving. Then you smelled it. Tea, certainly. The dry, complex, faintly grassy scent of good leaf tea, of many different teas mingling. But beneath that, something warmer and spicier. Cardamom, perhaps, and cinnamon, and something floral and faintly sweet that you could not name, but which seemed familiar, as though you had encountered it once in a dream and half remembered it. The scent came in a slow breath through the gap beneath the door, and it settled around you, and it was the most quietly welcoming thing you had encountered all day. You pushed the door open. The bell above it gave a small, clean sound, a single chime, delicate and clear. The room was warm, very warm. Not the aggressive heat of a busy kitchen, but the settled, even warmth of a space that has been warm for a long time, that has absorbed its warmth into its walls and its floors and its wooden shelves. Along those shelves, from floor to ceiling on every wall, stood hundreds of canisters and jars and wrapped paper parcels, each one labeled in a small, careful hand. The room smelled, up close, even more richly of everything it had promised through the door. Behind the counter, almost as still as the room itself, stood an old man. He was tall but slightly stooped, in the way of tall people who have spent many years in low-ceiling spaces. He wore a long, woolen apron, dark green, over a collarless shirt, and his white hair was combed neatly to one side. He was measuring tea from a canister into a small brass scale, and he performed this task with the quiet attention of someone who has done it 10,000 times and finds it still entirely satisfying. He looked up when you entered. He did not startle. He did not hurry. He simply looked up with the calm, unhurried expression of someone who has been expecting you, not today specifically, but eventually, in the way that certain places and certain people always seem to have been quietly waiting. "Come in," he said. His voice was low and easy, with a faint trace of an accent that placed him nowhere precisely. "Come in out of the mist. You'll have had a walk of it." He set down the small brass weight he had been holding and placed his hands on the counter, patient and still. "There's water just come to the boil. Let me pour you something warm." You stepped fully inside. The door swung gently closed behind you, and the sound of the harbor, the distant foghorn, the slow creak of the ropes faded until it was almost nothing. Almost. Just enough to know it was still there. Just enough to feel that the world outside was exactly as it should be. Dark and misty and calm and very, very far away. You let out a breath you had not known you were holding. The old merchant smiled, a small, quiet smile that settled into the creases of his face as though it had been there for years. And he reached for a pot from the shelf behind him, and the amber light fell warmly across everything, and the foghorn called once more from the harbor and faded, and the mist pressed softly against the glass. And you were here, and you were warm, and everything, for now, was very, very still. Part 2, inside the tea shop. The room gathered around you the way warmth always does. Not all at once, but in slow degrees, beginning at your hands and moving inward. You stood for a moment just inside the door, letting your eyes adjust to the low amber light, letting the smell of the place settle fully over you. It was the smell of somewhere that had been tended for a very long time. Not cleaned and polished and made presentable, but tended, the way a garden is tended, or a friendship, with steady, patient attention over many years. The shelves were the first thing you truly took in. They ran from floor to ceiling on every wall, interrupted only by the door through which you had entered, and a small window through which the mist pressed, soft and gray, against the glass. The shelves were built of dark wood, old enough to have developed a deep, warm luster that caught the candlelight and held it in long, curved gleams. And on every shelf, in rows so orderly they seemed almost ceremonial, stood the tins. There were hundreds of them, hundreds, at least, perhaps more, in the deeper shadows at the top of the room, where the lamplight barely reached. They were of every size, tall cylindrical tins with fitted lids, low wide ones with hinged tops, square ones with paper seals, round ones wrapped in cloth, Some were plain, dark green, deep red, a creamy ivory. And some were decorated with patterns that told, in miniature, of the countries from which their contents had traveled. A blue tin painted with a river winding through mountains of pale ink. A gold tin printed with dense jungle foliage, and the suggestion of a plantation sloping toward an unseen sea. A red tin bearing a map so fine you would need a magnifying glass to trace its coastlines. Each tin had a label, small, handwritten, careful. And the names on those labels were a kind of quiet poetry. Darjeeling First Flush, Lapsang Souchong, Kimun, Ceylon Broken Orange Pico, Nilgiri Frost, Gyokuro, Oolong of the Iron Goddess, White Needle of Fujian. You found yourself moving along the nearest shelf, reading them slowly. There was no reason to hurry. The merchant did not hurry you. He had moved to the small stove at the back of the shop, a black iron affair, compact and well used. And you could hear, just faintly, the soft percussion of his preparations, the setting down of a lid, the gentle clink of a teapot against a shelf, the quiet sound of water beginning to stir. The light in the shop came from 3 sources, and each was different. Near the door, a lantern hung from a low beam. It was oil burning with a steady yellow flame that moved only when the door had opened and had long since settled back to stillness. On the counter, a candle stood in a brass holder, its flame the smallest of the 3, but the warmest, and it cast the most intimate circle of light, a light that seemed made for close attention, for reading, for the quiet examination of small and beautiful things. And at the back, above the stove, a second lantern, this one slightly brighter, under which the merchant worked with the ease of someone performing a task that required no conscious thought at all. Between the 3 lights, the shop existed in a comfortable graduated shadow. The upper shelves were dim. The corners were dim. The darkness was not empty or cold. It was the darkness of a room full of things, a darkness that had texture and depth, that smelled of tea and old wood, and the faint ghost of 1,000 previous evenings. It was the kind of darkness in which you could close your eyes and feel entirely, utterly safe. "This one," said the merchant, "from behind you," and you turned. He was holding a small tin, plain, dark, with a handwritten label you could not yet read, and he regarded it with an expression of quiet familiarity, the way one regards something known and trusted. "This one is what the evening calls for. You'll have been out in the damp a good while." He did not ask. He simply set the tin on the counter and drew a wooden spoon from a jar beside the candle. You watched him measure. He did not use scales this time. He had the measure in his hand, had it in his wrist and his fingers, the way certain knowledge lives not in the mind but in the body. 2 spoonfuls, loosely packed into the pot. The pot was earthenware, the color of old terracotta, rounded and smooth from long use. He set it on the counter and lifted the kettle from the stove. "Not boiling," he said, almost to himself. "Never boiling. Just arrived at the edge of it. There." And he poured. The sound of the water entering the pot was extraordinarily pleasant. A low, steady, intimate sound, a rushing, and then a slowing, and then a settling. Steam rose from the spout of the kettle, and from the lid of the pot, almost simultaneously, 2 thin columns that curled upward into the lamplight and dispersed into the warm air of the shop. The merchant set the lid on the pot and placed his hands on the counter and was still. 4 minutes, he said. Perhaps 5. There's no hurry. There was no hurry. You had understood this somehow from the moment you stepped inside. The harbor was out there, and the mist and the distant foghorn calling low and steady across the dark water. You could hear it still, barely, through the thick old walls, but in here, time moved differently. Not faster or slower, precisely, but more gently, more like water than like clockwork. The 4 minutes passed the way good silences pass, not emptily, but full of small, quiet things. The tick of the metal cooling at the edge of the stove, the almost inaudible creak of the building settling, the soft mutter of the candle flame. He poured through a small strainer into a cup, wide-mouthed, handleless, the kind of cup that asks to be held in both hands. The tea was the color of amber, of old honey, of lamplight seen through water. It was perfectly clear. Steam rose from it in a single, leisurely coil. He set it before you on the counter and said nothing. You wrapped both hands around it. The heat moved through the ceramic into your palms, up through your fingers, into your wrists. It was a deep, even warmth, not the sharp heat of something just off the boil, but a warmth that had settled into itself, a warmth with patience in it. You lifted it and breathed in before you drank. The scent was complex in the way that deeply simple things are always complex, the way wood smoke is complex, or old books, or rain on warm stone. There was the grass and mineral note of the leaf itself, and under that, something gently sweet, like dried fruit left in the sun. A hint of something almost smoky, not heavily, not intrusively, but there in the deepest part of the breath. And beneath it all, something you could not name, something that seemed to belong not to any particular place or plant, but to the act of tea-making itself, to the long and patient alchemy of leaf and water and time. You drank. The warmth moved into you like a tide coming in, slow, inevitable, complete. It spread from your chest outward. Your shoulders, which you had not known were tense, released. Your jaw, which you had not known was set, softened. The sound of the harbor, the distant foghorn, always the foghorn, sounded once more, very far away, and it seemed not lonely, but companionable now, a reminder that the world was large and mostly quiet and meant you no harm at all. You pulled your coat a little closer and walked on. The streets twisted pleasantly here. No straight lines, no rushing corridors. Instead, each turn offered something new. A bow-fronted window full of pressed herbs hanging upside down to dry, a door painted deep green with a brass knocker shaped like a fox, a narrow passage between two buildings where a tabby cat sat perfectly still, watching you with the unblinking patience of something much older than it appeared. You slowed your steps, letting the town come to you at its own pace. There was no need to hurry. There was, in truth, no reason to hurry at all. It was the light you noticed first. A warm golden light, not the blue-white of electric lamps, but something older and gentler, the color of tea held up to a candle, spilling out from a low window at the far end of a lane so narrow it barely deserved the name. A small painted sign, dark wood, with faded lettering, hung from a bracket above the door. The letters were worn but legible. Forsyth & Co. Books, maps, and miscellany. Below these words, someone had painted a small open book. its pages turning in an imaginary wind. The lane was called Amber Lane. You could read it on a ceramic tile set into the brickwork at the corner, pale blue letters on a white ground, cracked along one edge, but holding together still. Amber Lane. The name suited the light perfectly. You stepped toward the window. The glass was old, slightly wavy, the kind that distorts what it holds just enough to make everything beyond it look like a memory. Through it, you could see shelves. Tall, dark wooden shelves stacked so densely with books that the spines seemed to form a kind of wallpaper, a patchwork of burgundy and forest green and faded blue, of gold lettering and cracked leather and cloth covers worn soft at the corners. A lamp burned on a low table. A small fire glowed somewhere deeper in the shop, its light flickering orange across the ceiling. And then there was the smell. Even out here in the rain-damp air of the lane, something reached you, faint but unmistakable. Old paper, dry wood, a thread of something warm and spiced, like tea steeped long and strong. Beeswax, perhaps, the faint ghost of pipe tobacco, though there was none burning now. It was the smell of a place that had been inhabited quietly and contentedly for a very long time. You pushed open the door. A small bell rang above your head. Not a sharp ring, but a soft, round tone. The kind a bell makes when it is old and has been rung 10,000 times and has worn its own edges smooth. The sound hung in the air for a moment and then dissolved into the hush of the shop. The warmth met you immediately. It was the warmth of a room that has been warm for a very long time, deep and settled, rising from the floorboards and radiating from the walls, from the books themselves, as though all those pages had absorbed decades of firelight and were giving it gently back. You stood in the doorway for a moment, letting it reach you. The shop was small, but it did not feel cramped. It felt, and this was the only word for it, complete, as though nothing were missing. The shelves rose from floor to ceiling on every wall, packed with volumes of every size. A wooden ladder on a brass rail stood to one side, angled up toward the higher shelves, patient and ready. A low table near the fire held a stack of books in mid-arrangement, as though someone had paused their work only moments ago. A Persian rug in faded reds and golds covered the floor between the shelves. Two chairs, wide, cushioned, well-used, sat on either side of the hearth, and behind a low counter at the far end of the shop, half lit by the lamp at his elbow, stood the keeper. He was an elderly man, spare and upright, with silver hair that had gone somewhat soft at the temples and a pair of round spectacles perched low on his nose. He wore a dark waistcoat over a white shirt, the sleeves rolled to the elbow in the manner of someone who had been working quietly and without fuss, and there was a pencil tucked behind one ear. His hands, resting on the open ledger before him, were the hands of a man who had spent a great many years in the company of books. Careful hands, unhurried hands, with ink faint at the fingertips. He looked up at the sound of the bell. His eyes, behind the spectacles, were dark and warm and quietly glad. "Good evening," he said. His voice was low and even, unhurried as the river you had passed on the road. "Come in out of the wet. You found us just in time." You stepped fully inside, and the door swung gently closed behind you. The bell sounded once more, softer now, like an afterthought. "I wasn't sure I'd find anywhere open," you said, glancing around at the shelves, at the lamp, at the steady small fire. The town seems to be settling in for the evening. It does that, the old man said, and there was the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Netherton-on-Fell is not a town that keeps late hours, but I find I am always here. One or two people always seem to need a book at unexpected times. He closed the ledger with a soft sound. I am Forsyth, Edmund Forsyth. Welcome to Ember Lane. You moved slowly into the shop, the Persian rug soft underfoot, the lamplight catching the gilded spines of the nearest shelf. Everything had the quality of something preserved, not frozen, but held, the way a pressed flower is held between pages, still itself and yet made gentle by time. There were globes on a high shelf, one of them quite old with coastlines you didn't quite recognize. There were ink bottles, stoppered with cork, and a wooden tray of old quills. There were framed maps on the one stretch of wall not occupied by shelves. A map of a coastline, a map of a mountain range, a map drawn by hand with compass roses in each corner and small handwritten notes in the margins. It felt like a room outside of time, not in a strange way, not in a way that unsettled. Quite the opposite. It felt as though the ordinary rush of hours and years simply did not reach this far down Ember Lane, as though whatever urgency existed in the wider world had agreed by some unspoken arrangement to wait outside the door. "Do you travel far, mister?" Forsyth asked. He had come out from behind the counter now and was standing by the fire, his hands clasped lightly at his back, regarding you with quiet interest. "Far enough," you said. "Today has been a long one." He nodded, as though this explained a great deal. "Then you'll want to sit for a moment. There's no hurry, not tonight. The rain doesn't seem inclined to stop, and the fire is in no danger of going out." He gestured to one of the chairs by the hearth, the left one which was slightly more worn than the other, its cushion shaped by long acquaintance. "Sit. I'll put the kettle on." You sat. The chair received you with the particular generosity of old furniture that has known many people and harbors no judgment. The fire was low and even, its coals glowing a deep orange red. Above the mantel, a clock ticked, slowly, patiently, though you found you could not quite read the time. The hands seemed to rest somewhere comfortable and approximate. From somewhere behind the shelves, you heard the quiet sound of water beginning to heat, the tap of a cupboard, the small companionable sounds of a kettle being made ready. The rain tapped at the window in its own soft rhythm. The fire settled with a gentle creak. Somewhere, deep in the shelves, a draft turned a page of an open book with a sound like a whispered word, and you felt, for the first time in a long while, that there was nowhere else you needed to be. The shop breathed around you. The books held their quiet. The lamp burned on the table without flicker or fuss. And somewhere in the warm, paper-scented air of that old place, the long tiredness of the day began very slowly to soften, the way frost softens when brought indoors, without drama, without effort, simply by being somewhere warm at last. Mr. Forsyth reappeared in the gap between two shelves, carrying a small tray. "Chamomile," he said, setting the tray on the low table between the chairs. "With a little honey, if you'd like it. I find it suits the evening." Steam curled upward from the two white cups in long, slow spirals, catching the lamplight, rising and dissolving and rising again. You reached for the cup. It was warm in both hands. Outside, on Ember Lane, the rain fell on. The gas lamps burned their steady gold, and the night which had been waiting at a patient distance, moved a little closer, gently, without alarm, and settled itself around the small, warm light of the bookshop, like a cloak. Part 2. Inside the bookshop. The fire was the heart of it all. It burned in a low iron grate, set into the far wall, beneath a mantle of dark wood on which rested a carriage clock, 2 brass candlesticks, and a small earthenware pot of dried lavender that had long since lost its scent but kept its shape perfectly. The coals glowed in slow shifting colors, deep orange, then amber, then a brief bright red where the air reached them, and above them a few small flames moved without urgency, bending and straightening like something quietly breathing. You sat in the left-hand chair and watched the fire and said nothing for a while. There was no need to say anything. Mr. Forsyth had settled into the chair opposite, his cup held in both hands, his spectacles pushed up slightly on his nose, his eyes resting on some middle distance between the fire and the bookshelves. He had the quality, you noticed, of someone entirely at ease with silence. Not a heavy silence, not an awkward one, but the kind that belonged to a room the way the furniture did. Natural, unhurried, simply there. You let your gaze move slowly around the shop. The shelves were extraordinary. They rose from floor to ceiling on every available wall, built of dark oak that had deepened over the years to something almost black at the edges, the grain of the wood visible where the polish had worn thin. The shelves themselves bowed slightly in the middle, not dangerously, but gently, with the comfortable sag of something that has carried a great weight for a very long time, and made peace with it. The books were packed in tightly, their spines outward, and what spines they were! Leather, dark green, burgundy, deep brown, black, cracked along the hinges, and soft at the corners. Cloth covers in faded blues and dusty reds, gilt lettering that caught the firelight when you turned your head just so, throwing up brief flashes of gold from titles half legible with age. Some volumes were fat and imposing. "What draws people to books, do you think?" you asked. Mr. Forsyth considered this for a long moment, his head tilted slightly, his eyes moving slowly around the room, as though the answer might be visible somewhere among the shelves. "Company," he said at last. "I think it is, most fundamentally, company. The sense that someone else has thought carefully about something and set it down, and that you are welcome to follow along. It is," he paused, searching, like finding a lamp left burning in a window. "Someone has been here before you. Someone left a light." The rain outside had settled into a steady, gentle sound, not drumming, but a continuous soft, white noise hiss against the glass, punctuated occasionally by a deeper note when a drop found the window ledge or the iron bracket above the door. Inside, the fire burned on. The lamps held their amber pools of light. The books waited in their thousands on their shelves, patient and present, each one a voice that had once said, "Listen." You drank your cocoa slowly. The warmth spread from your hands to your arms, from your arms to your chest, from your chest outward to the edges of you, finding all the cold, tired places and attending to them, one by one, without fuss. And the shop held its breath around you, softly, the way a cupped hand holds a small warm thing, keeping the wind away. Welcome. Tonight, we step softly into a quiet Victorian street where the evening fog drifts gently between warm, glowing lanterns, and time seems to slow with every breath. At the corner of a narrow lane, there is a small tailor shop, known as Velvet and thread, where soft fabrics rest in silence and every stitch is made with care and patience. Inside, an elderly tailor works by candlelight, crafting garments not just from cloth, but from memory, warmth, and quiet stories. So settle in, relax your shoulders, and let the world grow still around you, because tonight you are safe here in the gentle glow of the tailor of velvet and thread, where each thread leads you softly into rest. Part 1, Arrival on Velvet Street. There are evenings that do not announce themselves. They arrive the way fog arrives, without hurry, without declaration, settling into the low places first, and then rising softly until the whole world has been made quieter and closer and more itself. This was one of those evenings. The city beyond had its noise still, its distant clatter, its far-off voices. But here, in this particular district, at this particular hour, the noise had receded to something you could barely hear. More impression than sound, more memory than presence. You had been walking for a while, not lost exactly, but not entirely sure of your direction either, which is a different thing, and often a better one. The streets here were narrow and old, their cobblestones worn smooth by a great many years of feet and wheels and weather, so that they caught the last of the dusk light and gave it back in long curved gleams. The buildings on either side leaned slightly toward each other above your head, not alarmingly, but with the comfortable intimacy of things that have stood close for a long time and grown accustomed to the company. The fog had come in from the river. It moved through the streets in long, unhurried drifts, thin enough still to see through, but present in the way of something that intended to stay. It softened the edges of the gas lamps, which had just been lit along the length of the street, turning each one into a blurred aureole of amber, rather than a point of light. It gathered at the base of the iron railings and curled around the lampposts and lay itself along the gutters with the patience of something that had nowhere better to be. The cobblestones were damp beneath your feet, not wet. The rain had come earlier and gone, leaving only this residue of cold and clean. Your breath, when you exhaled, made its own small fog before you. You pulled your coat closer. The street curved here, a long, gentle curve that Victorian streets sometimes make, following some older logic of land or water that preceded the buildings themselves. And as you followed it, the character of the district shifted slightly. The shops here were smaller, older, the kind of businesses that had occupied their premises for a very long time and had no particular intention of changing. A cobbler, a small chandler's with candles visible through the wavy glass of the window, an apothecary whose sign had faded to near illegibility, but whose amber bottles in the window were unmistakable. And then, at the far end of the curve, where the street narrowed still further and the fog lay thickest, a warm light. You did not decide to walk toward it. Your feet simply turned, the way feet sometimes do, when the rest of you has already understood something that the thinking part of your mind is still catching up with. The light was golden, not the blue-white of newer lamps, but something older and warmer, the color of candlelight seen through old glass, the color of firelight in a room you remember, without being able to say exactly from when. The street was called Velvet Street. You read the name on a small ceramic tile set into the brickwork at the corner. Dark blue letters on cream, slightly worn at the edges, but perfectly legible. Velvet Street. You stood for a moment with the name in your mind, finding it fitting in a way you could not have explained, The fog moved around you as you stood there, gentle and unhurried. Distant, from somewhere beyond the rooftops, came the sound of a church bell beginning its evening count. You listened to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The notes fell into the fog and were softened by it, each one arriving at your ears, slightly blurred, slightly warmer than bells usually sound, as though the fog were kind to them. And beneath the bells, fainter still, the soft sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones somewhere 2 streets over. The steady rhythmic sound of a horse walking at the end of a long day. A sound so old and so ordinary and so deeply right that it seemed to belong to the street the way the fog belonged to it, as though both had always been here and always would be. You walked down Velvet Street. The shops on either side were mostly closed, their shutters drawn, their signs still. But halfway down the left side of the street, one window was not shuttered. One window was lit. It was a small window, not a grand display window, but the plain, honest window of a working shop. Its silo and its glass old and slightly irregular, the kind that was made when glass was still handmade and imperfect, and all the more beautiful for it. In the window, fabric had been arranged with care, a length of deep charcoal wool folded softly. Beside it, a bolt of something dark green that seemed to absorb and return the candlelight in equal measure. And draped over the corner of the display, casually, as though placed there without particular ceremony, a length of deep blue velvet that moved in some imperceptible draft with the slow, patient motion of something breathing. Above the window, a sign hung from an iron bracket, swaying very slightly in the evening air. It was a painted sign of dark wood, its letters picked out in gold, that had faded to a warm, uneven amber. You read it once, and then again, velvet and thread, and beneath these words, smaller, bespoke tailoring, Est, 1851. A bell above the door, not a sharp bell, a round one, soft and deep, the kind that has been rung so many thousands of times that it has worn its own edges smooth and learned a gentler note. It sounded once as you pushed the door open, and again, softer as the door swung closed behind you. The warmth met you immediately. It was the warmth of a room that has been warm for a long time. The particular, settled warmth of a place that is heated not merely for comfort, but out of necessity. Because the work done here requires it. Because cloth must be pressed and fingers must be nimble. And a cold shop is an enemy of good tailoring. It rose from the floorboards and radiated from a small iron stove in the corner, whose surface glowed dull orange with the coals inside it. It carried with it the smell of the shop, a smell you would not have been able to predict but recognized immediately as exactly right. Warm wool and the faint mineral sharpness of a hot iron. And beneath both of these, something sweeter, like beeswax. And beneath that, the old, clean smell of wood that has been polished for many years. You stood just inside the door and breathed it in. The shop was small and full, not cluttered. Full. There is a difference. Clutter has no logic, no intention. Fullness is the natural result of a space used well and long, of objects finding their places through use and habit, and the slow accumulation of a working life. Every surface in the room held something purposeful. Bolts of cloth, standing upright in a wooden rack along the left wall, organized by color from dark to light. deepest blacks and navies at the far end, giving way gradually to pale grays and creams. A cutting table of thick dark wood in the center of the room, its surface marked with the faint ghosts of 10,000 chalk lines, each one drawn and cut and long since brushed away, but leaving in aggregate a kind of palimpsest of all the garments that had ever been made here. His voice was low and even, the voice of someone who has spent a great many years in quiet rooms doing quiet work, and whose voice has adapted itself accordingly. Not loud, not soft exactly, but measured. A voice that suited the room the way the warmth suited it, the way the smell of beeswax and wool suited it, completely and without effort. "Good evening," you said. "I'm sorry to come in so late." "Not late at all," he said, and meant it. You could hear that he meant it. "I am almost always here. Please, come in properly. Don't stand at the door." You moved into the shop. Your eyes went to the fabric on the rack, all those deep, beautiful colors, the way the candlelight found each bolt differently, depending on its weave and weight. The velvet absorbed the light. The wool reflected it with a quiet warmth. The silks, there were a few on the higher shelves, caught it and threw it back in small, cold sparks. "You have a great deal of fabric," you said. 30 years of accumulation," he said, without apology or particular pride. Simply a statement of fact, the way a man might note that a tree in his garden had grown tall. "Some of it I have had a very long time. There are bolts up there." He nodded to the highest shelf. "That Mr. Alderton brought back from the continent before I had been in this shop 5 years. That was 1858. The fabric is still good." He said this with a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with boasting. It was the satisfaction of quality recognized and respected. "Please," he said, moving from behind the cutting table with a slow, unhurried step. "Come and sit. There is a chair by the stove. It belonged to my predecessor in this shop. He was a large man, and it is a large chair, and I find people are always glad of it." The chair was indeed large and warm, placed close enough to the stove that the heat reached you the moment you sat down, pressing in through the wool of your coat, finding your hands, finding the tiredness in your shoulders. The tailor moved to a small table near the window, a low table of the same dark wood as the cutting table, holding a spirit stove and a kettle and a teapot and 2 small cups. He had, you realized, already been expecting to offer tea. The kettle was already warm. "I am Whitmore," he said over his shoulder as he attended to the tea. "George Whitmore. I have kept this shop for 31 years, and my father kept it for 20 before me, and his name is still on the lease, which the landlord has never seen fit to correct, and which I have never seen fit to mention." There was the very faint suggestion of a smile in his voice. "What brings you to Velvet Street?" he asked, not intrusively, gently, in the manner of someone genuinely curious and entirely without agenda. "I was walking," you said. "I saw the light." He nodded, as though this were a complete and satisfying answer. Perhaps, you thought, it was. "People often find the street that way," he said, bringing the tea and setting it on the small table beside your chair. "In the fog, especially. The light carries differently in fog. It seems warmer than it is." A pause. "Or perhaps it is exactly as warm as it is. Perhaps the fog simply makes it easier to see." He settled into a lower chair across from you, his own chair, Clearly, its cushion shaped by long acquaintance and picked up his work again. The pinned fabric, the chalk-marked pattern. His hands moved through it with the ease of something done 10,000 times. The needle, finding its way without apparent direction. Part 2. Wax, Wick, and Quiet Hands. The morning tea had been drunk, the cup rinsed and set aside, and now Mr. Halbrook turned his attention to the work that would occupy the greater part of his day. In the room behind the shop, a space that served as both workshop and storeroom, the tools of his trade awaited him with the patient silence of inanimate things that know they will be needed. He moved through the narrow doorway, ducking his head slightly, though the passage was tall enough, a habit formed over long years when his back had been straighter and the world a fraction larger. The workshop was smaller than the shop itself, but it possessed a completeness that the front room lacked. Here was where the true work happened, where formless wax became light, where the alchemy of his craft transformed simple materials into something useful and good. The table that dominated the center of the room bore the marks of decades of labor. Its surface was scarred and stained, darkened in places where hot wax had spilled and cooled, lighter in others where his hands had worn the wood smooth through endless repetition. Along one wall stood shelves holding blocks of beeswax, their surfaces dull gold in the dim light. Beside them, wrapped in cloth, were stores of tallow, less expensive, less fragrant, but necessary nonetheless for those customers whose purses could not stretch to beeswax. Mr. Halbrook ran his hand along the edge of the table, a gesture of greeting, of acknowledgement. Then he set about preparing his workspace with the methodical care that had become second nature. First, the fire. The small stove in the corner needed tending, its embers from the night before stirred to life and fed with carefully chosen pieces of coal. Not too much. The heat must be steady and even, not fierce. Wax was a delicate thing, for all its seeming solidity. Too much heat, and it would scorch, turning bitter and dark. Too little, and it would never properly melt, remaining thick and unworkable. He worked the bellows gently, coaxing the fire to a steady glow. The warmth began to spread through the small room, chasing away the morning chill that had settled in the corners. Mr. Halbrook could feel it on his face, on his hands, a warmth that spoke of work about to begin, of purpose about to be fulfilled. While the stove heated, he selected the wax he would work with today. His hands moved over the blocks with assurance, choosing 3, all beeswax, for he had an order to fill for the cathedral, and they would accept nothing less. The wax was cool and firm beneath his fingers, its surface slightly rough. He could smell it even before heating, that characteristic scent of honey and summer meadows, of flowers and industry, and the patient work of bees. He broke the blocks into smaller pieces, using a broad-bladed knife, the wax fracturing along natural lines with satisfying cracks. The pieces went into a large copper pot, one that his father had used, and his father's father before that. The pot was burnished to a soft glow, its bottom darkened by years of heat, its handle wrapped in leather that had molded itself to the shape of hands, now long since. Still, Mr. Halbrook set the pot on the stove and watched as the wax began its transformation. As the embers fade in the fireplace and the quiet of the night settles over the cobblestone streets, our journey comes to an end. I hope you found peace on my shelf tonight. If you'd like to return for another tale, please leave a gentle like and subscribe to join our quiet little corner. Until we meet again, I am Oliver, wishing you a deep and restful sleep. Good night.